ECAP is a Christian ministry with a statement of faith modeled off of ECFA. Billy Graham created Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability 40 some odd years ago because he wanted to help churches in particular, but Christian ministries with financial stewardship. And so today we wish, honestly, that a ministry like ECAP didn't need to even exist. I know that might come as a surprise to you. You don't hear organizational leaders like me saying that they wish their organization didn't exist, but I truly mean that. And yet in a fallen world like we live in a Genesis 3 world, it's important that we come alongside of ministries to help them create these safe places for kids to hear the gospel. So ECAP has created child safety standards. These are freely available on our website. I encourage you to go there to tap into the child safety standards, as well as a number of other resources that we are making available. We're a membership-based organization, so we're able to put on free webinars like this because of the generosity of people who give to support our Christian nonprofit, and also through the support of our members. We're a membership-based association, and the accreditation we offer is really the capstone of our ministry. We come in and provide independent audits for your ministry, and the seal, our accreditation seal, is really not the end goal. It's that safe environment, but it's symbolic of the peace of mind that we want together to provide to parents, the confidence for you ministry leaders, and the deterrence for would-be predators that might be looking for trouble in our Christian ministries. So that's who we are and what we do. I'm here in the beautiful state of Florida, Jacksonville, Florida specifically. If you took Interstate 10 from my Southern California friends all the way across the country to where it ends, that's where you'd find us. I'm actually a California expat, like some of us across the country. I was born and raised in the LA area. And so just many of you are right down the road from, or right up the road from Los Angeles. And I'm glad to be with you all here today, broadcasting from Florida. All right, Ken, why don't you share with us who you are, and tell us also a little bit about Church HR Network. We're so thankful for just the friendship and partnership that we have as an affiliate provider.
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and thanks, Jeff, for arranging the webinar and having me on. Always excited to talk about this kind of stuff and spread this information. So appreciate everybody being here. So again, my name is Ken Klopman. I come from a background of 37 years in law enforcement. I retired as a sergeant from Oxnard Police there in Southern California. I am now a California refugee living in Washington State. Left about, I finished up with my agency about 4.5 years ago, which is when I moved to Washington. So, but I continue to keep my hands in like safety and security businesses, but working both as an investigator, doing background investigations primarily on public safety candidates. My background in law enforcement is I was a sex crimes and child abuse investigator working in our SVU unit. I was also the supervisor of our youth services unit, overseeing like the school resource officers. And then we all had responsibility for like the safety and security of about 65 public schools in five districts in Oxnard. I supervise our police chaplain corps, and then I also have experience in ministry, having served as a leader of one of my church's ministries when I was still there in Ventura, leading a camp ministry for children of abuse, abandonment, and neglect. I'm currently serving as the Director of Ministry Safety and Security for Church HR Network. We are basically a full service ministry support organization. We provide HR support to churches and other faith-based organizations, everything from HR compliance to training, site vulnerability assessments, risk mitigation, and safety and security. We're available to our clients in a variety of ways: immediate, live chat. We maintain an online library with hundreds of resources, including documents and templates, We have online training, and we also do on-site services. Like we'll come out and do like a site vulnerability assessment, or we'll do an on-site um, live training, but again, geared primarily to churches and faith-based organizations. So that's about me.
Ken, thank you so much. And I'm just asking folks to share in the chat just who you are, what you do, where you serve, and we'll be sure to follow up. I think we've got most everyone's email address through the registration, but we'll be able to follow up with some more resources and information after this. So, well, let me set up our time together. We're really not here to convince you that abuse takes place in our culture or that it takes place in our ministries. If you need that sort of convincing or conversation, please feel free to reach out to me. I've shared with you my email and my cell number in the chat. So we're here to serve you. I also want to just recognize Brigham Winkler from our team, also here in Jacksonville, Florida. Brigham serves as our general editor. And then Jesse Maynor may not be able to turn on his camera, but Jesse's down in Tampa as our accreditation program director. So thanks to our team here with us today. All right, well, let's jump in. When we talk about abuse, this is kind of an umbrella term. It gets thrown around pretty frequently. But what we're talking about here, preventing, is sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, and even to some degree, spiritual abuse. And so those are, I throw them at you really quickly. And there's definitions on our website for more of this information and statistics on the problem of abuse. But that's really what we're talking about here, of preventing sexual abuse, physical abuse, spiritual abuse to some degree, and neglect. Of course, there's other types of abuse, including emotional abuse, and but what we're talking about here is really preventing abuse from taking place in a ministry context. So when I talk about ministry frequently, and I think many of you are with churches, but the principles that we're talking about here, and specifically Assembly Bill 506 that Ken's going to talk about here in a little bit, is applicable to any child and youth serving organization. You'll also find that while we are a religious nonprofit, many of the principles that you hear in our training today are atheological in the sense that they apply to any program, any context, even secular and other religious organizations as well. So, of course, we're association-based, and so to be a part of our accreditation association, you've got to agree to our statement of faith. But the principles and information that you hear will receive today can work in any child and youth serving organization, frankly, anywhere else in the country. Now, a few more definitions for you. Ken and I may refer to minors, children, youth, kids even, and really what we're talking about are minors 0 to 18, okay? Another term I want to use for you is worker. Sometimes we'll refer to those workers. Those are employees and volunteers that directly have access to children and youth. And so we typically lump those together with the term worker. And whenever we talk about a child protection program, that might sound very formal to you, but we're really just talking about all of your measures that you have in place to keep kids safe. And we trust that you have many of these already in place, and that the training today will help you take some very practical steps moving forward. So what we're talking about today is child protection in general, and in particular, Assembly Bill 506. This became law a couple of years ago, and Ken's going to explain a little bit more about what that is and what that means for you in ministry. The impact, of course, of abuse is quite significant. It has lifelong effects on the spiritual, physical, and mental, frankly, not just of children, but of all human beings. And so we talk about trauma, and we talk about caring for those who've experienced trauma and victims of abuse as survivors. So just a few definitions for you as we move forward. The number one reason why a church will end up in a court of law is the sexual abuse of a minor. And that's according to pre-pandemic statistics from our friends over at Church Law and Tax, part of Christianity Today. That was over a 5-year period where even 1 year, I want to say it's 2016, it may not have been the number one reason, but it was the number two reason. And so we see sexual abuse as an issue in our culture. 1 in 3 girls will be sexually abused before the age of 18. 1 in 7 boys sexually abused before the age of 18. And something that we're learning more and more about is related to the special needs population. Something like 90% of special needs persons will experience some form of sexual abuse in their lifetime, which is stunning for us as Christians who believe that every life has tremendous worth and value and dignity as image bearers of the triune God. And so we're here to prevent abuse. Again, we want to be compliant to the laws of the land, but we also understand this to be a matter of biblical stewardship. We'll stand before the Lord and give an account. And then when you talk about spiritual abuse, when you talk about sexual abuse in a ministry context, oftentimes that has lifelong spiritual implications as well. And while I don't have statistics on this for you, what we do hear quite frequently is that those who have experienced sexual abuse in a ministry context oftentimes want nothing to do with the church. They want nothing to do with God. They reject the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that therefore makes this issue a matter of great commission importance. So that's getting to some of the problem and to some of what motivates us as Bible-believing, gospel-loving Christians to lead in this area and to care for the vulnerable. Now, when we talk about the vulnerable, for the most part here, we're talking about children and youth, but we also recognize that special needs persons are also vulnerable, as well as some in the elderly populations. At ECAP, our board just last week has authorized us to explore supplementary standards to keep the special needs adults in ministry safe. And so we're excited to take some steps towards helping Christian ministries keep the vulnerable in the special needs community safe. And hopefully you'll see some more information and resources on that topic in 2024 and 2025. So, all right, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ken to talk about child protection and in particular, Assembly Bill 506. Ken, take it away.
All right. So, fun topic. Those of you that are aware of AB 506. So AB 506 is Assembly Bill 506. It has since been codified in the Business and Professions Code under 18975. And it essentially mandates that administrators, employees, and regular volunteers of youth service organizations, there's several pieces to it, that they have to complete those 3 categories: administrators, employees, and volunteers of youth service organizations have to complete training in child abuse reporting. They must complete training in child abuse and neglect identification, and they must undergo a DOJ LifeScan fingerprint criminal records check. I'm not sure how many of you, I'm hoping that there's nobody here today that this is the first time they've heard of it, because this law has been in effect since January of 2022. It was modified about 9 months later, I think, after some pushback from churches that the way the law was written was not practical for churches. They changed some of the language in it, and they also pushed back the date, but it's becoming fully effective here coming up on January 1st, 2024. And you can hit me up in the comments or something like that, but it's important, if you have not already done so, and it's probably already too late, but you've got to get started at some point, that you apply to California DOJ to get your ORI number, which is it's an originating agency number. It identifies you as a particular agency that's entitled to get access to DOJ records to look at what they call CORI, criminal offender record information. And together with getting that ORI number, you will have to designate at least one or more CORs, custodians of record. That all takes time. So if you haven't even begun that by now, you probably will not be able to be compliant by January 1st here coming up in the new year. But you've got to get started somewhere. So, and then we can help you through that process. But AB 506 also requires that youth service organizations develop and implement child prevention policies and procedures, and that those policies and procedures minimally include two things: child abuse reporting procedures and child abuse prevention policies and procedures. And the language is that it's not limited to policies requiring, to the greatest extent possible, the presence of at least two mandated reporters whenever administrators, employees, or volunteers are in contact with or supervising minors. That that phrase, "to the greatest extent possible," that was part of that amendment that took place in September after the initial implementation of the law in January. They added those words, "to the greatest extent possible," and I'll circle back to that. So kind of let's pick this apart a little bit. So a youth service organization is defined under this business, and if you want to look this stuff up or have reference to it in the future, it's AB 506 was the original bill that proposed the law. When it became law, it is put under Business and Professions Code 18975. And 18975 defines a youth service organization as an organization that employs or utilizes the services of persons who, due to their relationship with the organization, are mandated reporters pursuant to Penal Code Section 11165.7. Okay, so and I know this can get a little bit confusing here. So basically, Business and Professions Code 18975 is the law that tells you what you have to do. Penal Code Section 11165 is the law that defines, it's the mandated reporting statute. And it's where it defines who is a mandated reporter. There's almost 50 different categories of people that fall under mandated reporting requirements. And I'm just guessing based on who might be in this room. I'm not going to go through all 50, but it would include people like teachers, teachers' aides, instructional aides, administrators or employees of public or private youth centers, youth recreation programs, or youth organizations, administrators, board members, or employees of public or private organizations whose duties require direct contact and supervision of children. It also includes clergy, and clergy meaning a priest, a minister, a rabbi, religious practitioner, or similar functionary of a church, temple, or other recognized denomination or organization. So now let's break it down a little bit more. So an administrator, employee, or regular volunteer. Administrators are going to be like lead pastors, associate pastors, ministry administrators, or if you're organized this way, your CEO, COO, managers, your HR department, elders, deacons, all of that. They would fall in the category of administrators. Employees are just what it says. It's an employee, and that means all of them, regardless of if they're full-time status, part-time status, if they're seasonal, if they're classified as exempt, non-exempt, etc. If they're an employee, they fall under this. And then regular volunteers, this is where it kind of gets a little bit fun. The Penal Code section I just read about mandated reporters, Penal Code Section 11165.7, that section specifically says that volunteers are not by law mandated reporters. But AB 506 applies to what AB 506 calls regular volunteers. And that is somebody who is age 18 or over, who has direct contact with minors, and serves over 16 hours in 1 month or 32 hours in 1 year. And here's where it gets to be challenging. If you say that, well, then this volunteer isn't going to fall under that category, we're going to exempt them because they're working at 15 hours a month. But if they go over one time and they hit that mark, they exceed 16 hours a month, or at one point in the year they exceed that 32 hours, then you've got somebody who is required to do all of these things. And so something for you to consider is whether or not are you going to have categories of people who are, these are people who have been vetted, these are people who have not because we haven't had to vet them because they don't meet this this criteria. So because this is just a 1 hour a week volunteer, they're not going to hit either of these minimums throughout the year. We're going to exempt them. That might seem like the easy thing to do or the convenient thing to do or something that even that somebody wants to do just because their volunteers don't want to go through the extras. But you have to consider that what this is going to do is put a burden on your plate that you're going to have to keep track, or you're going to have 2 different ID tags for your volunteers, a green one for the people who are fully vetted and free to do anything, and a red one for the people who haven't really quite gone through everything. And then the other thing I would just say to you is just because you can doesn't really mean that you should. So under AB 506, a regular volunteer who doesn't work more than 16 hours in a month or more than 32 hours in the year is not required to meet these requirements of attending child abuse recognition training, mandated reporter training, and undergoing the background check. But just because they don't have to do those things, do you want a person like that? Do you want an unvetted, untrained person like that within your ministry? AB 506 permits it, but just like the fox that exploits the weakness in the hen house, if every other church is requiring all their volunteers who have access to kids is required to do everything regardless of their level of service, and your church says, nope, we're so desperate for volunteers that we're not going to exempt those folks because it's not really required by AB 506, then guess where the predator is likely to go try to put in an application and serve. He's going to go where it's easy, where he has easy access, where they are not as diligent in keeping the predators out. Okay, so now talking about the training that's required, there's 2 trainings that AB 506 mandates: child abuse recognition and mandated reporter training. Where can you find those? You probably find them in a lot of places. Church HR Network offers it. We have it online. It's in English. It's in Spanish. One of them, I forget which way. One of them is about 90 minutes. The other one's about 60 minutes. And it's included for all of our HR 360 subscribers. It's also by statute. It can be found at the Office of Child Abuse Prevention through the State Department of Social Services. And then, I don't know, Jeff, do you know others that you want to kind of throw out before we move on from this?
Yeah, our friends at Protect My Ministry also has a similar training that is video based, and I think Teleos as well would have video based training that's specific to those requirements.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Okay, so now moving on to the live scan requirement. So bear with me here because I'm trying to make a case here and show you something. So again, Business and Professions Code AB 506 18975 says administrators, employers, or volunteers of youth service organizations have to undergo a background check. It specifies that background check is pursuant to Penal Code Section 11105.3. And the purpose of this check is to identify and exclude people with criminal histories, with histories of child abuse. This Penal Code Section 11105.3, it refers to the California Department of Justice checking criminal offender record information, or what's called CORI, C-O-R-I. California DOJ checks CORI mandatorily using fingerprints. And so the reason why I'm being so intentional about this is because, frankly, I don't like the language of the way AB 506 was written, because it says that any administrator, employer, or regular volunteer of a youth service organization shall undergo a background check. I would argue that what the state is doing is not a background check. It's merely a criminal history check. A background check is far more inclusive than simply checking a criminal history. But because AB 506 refers to the California DOJ and mandatorily using fingerprints, what it is saying is that that commercial background checkers in themselves are not AB 506 compliant, just by their very nature of inputting data on your applicant, their name, their birth date, their social security number, whatever, their driver's license number, and then they will access like criminal court records. They'll look at other things. They can look at Megan's Law registries, things like that. They can conduct a form of a background check, but it will not be AB 506 compliant because it is not looking at California DOJ records using the applicant's fingerprints. So the only way that you can be compliant with AB 506 in this way is to have an ORI and to fingerprint your applicants. Now, let me just be clear. I'm not saying that you cannot use a commercial background checker. I'm just simply saying that you can't use them alone. You have to at least use LiveScan to be compliant. Anything after that you do, whether you go to a commercial background checker, you hire a private investigator, or you do all this yourself, you get on your own local court records, you search, you go to Megan's Law registry, you search and you do all of your own background yourself, that's all okay. But you cannot get around the fact that you have to go to LiveScan and have your applicant submit fingerprints. Okay. So again, if you haven't applied for your ORI or your COR, remember it goes into effect in January 2024. And then the other thing while we're talking about this is the way they wrote AB 506, it refers to a criminal offender record information check of the Department of Justice records. When they talk about DOJ, that's not the federal Department of Justice. That's the California Department of Justice. So AB 506 is really only requiring you to check California DOJ records. But that is not a best practice because you need to know where your applicant has previously lived and worked. So if they come from the South and they've worked in Louisiana, they've worked in Alabama, wherever they worked in Arkansas, and now they have transplanted to California and they're coming to you to try to get a job. If you only check California DOJ records, then you won't, you'll miss anything that happened there. So you need to check the FBI box. I'm sorry, your name's not up there, but Guru 4X, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, you got muted somehow at the beginning of the last paragraph of words.
Okay, so sorry if some of you heard it. So I'll repeat that because AB 506 was written in a way that it only requires a check of DOJ records, and when they say that, they mean the California DOJ. If you only check the DOJ box on the applicant's fingerprint form, then you will only get a search of California records. And it's really important, even if the applicant doesn't say that they lived anywhere in the state, I would strongly urge you to just check that FBI box. There's another box right next to it, FBI box, and check this applicant for their records throughout the entire country. It'll expand your search to a national record search. And in fact, I would even say that on your employment and your volunteer applications, it would also be a best practice for you to collect address and employment history. Don't just ask them what's your current address and what's your current employment. I get it, they're just a volunteer possibly, or they're an employee, but in the case of volunteers, I can understand people that want to kind of shortcut this and make this simple because this is volunteers and volunteers are hard to get, and so they really want to simplify the process. But this isn't really about simplifying it for the volunteer, although I get it. It's about making sure that you vet the people that are incoming to your organization, whether they're getting paid or not, and that you have only safe people in there. So yes, it's a pain to have to ask them to say, hey, give me your residence history for 7 years, give me your employment history for 7 years. I need your boss's phone numbers, your coworkers' phone numbers, your landlord's phone numbers. I need neighbors and all that. But this will help you to know where to look for information on this person, because then this next section I'm going to talk about really what a proper background investigation is. But it does begin with collecting the right information. So background, what's the difference between a background and a live scan? So unfortunately, our legislator was a little bit sloppy in their language in AB 506 because they call it a live scan background check. Again, live scan searches DOJ records for criminal offender record information, CORI. Despite the language in that piece of legislation, live scan is not in itself a background check. It is simply part of a comprehensive background check. A thorough background check would actually include everything starting from the very beginning. A completed employment or volunteer application that includes that address and that employment history and phone numbers to contact all of those people. It would include positive photo identification verification to know that the application that you're collecting and the person that's presenting themselves is really who they say they are. How will you do a background check on a person if you're not even convinced that they are the person using the name that they have given you? So you would want to like say, hey, thanks for your application. Could I see your driver's license also? Make sure everything matches, the birth date, whatever. And then I would attach a copy of it. So that kind of shows that, hey, I verified that this application came from the person with this identification. You should conduct actual face-to-face interviews using at least 2 of your staff, maybe even 3, but I wouldn't do 1, because then you got a perspective of 1, and maybe I'm enamored by that person's, they're charming, they're charismatic, and then I become like oblivious to like some red flags that are there. So you should have more than 1 person conduct the face-to-face interview. For your volunteers, you would probably want to have church attendance and membership requirements. Now, whether you're going to do this with employees, I'm with Church HR Network, but I'm not the expert on the HR side. I'm not sure that you can do that. I think you cannot. But if you were inclined to want to apply this to your employees, I would talk to you like your HR department or your legal counsel. You can certainly do it with volunteers. And the reason that you want this church attendance requirement is if you just make it easy for somebody that just moved in from another state to just waltz in and say, hey, I'd like to work and I only want to work with children, and you're so desperate for volunteers that you eagerly accept them and you give them a role working with children, you know nothing about this person. Again, you just made it really easy for somebody to come in and have access to children. That's what a predator wants. A predator wants the easiest, quickest access to children. But if you put a church attendance requirement on them, for example, let me just back up. You want to come and be part of the parking lot beautification ministry? Hey, go for it. We're starting this weekend and there's no problem. Because what's the risk, really, right? But if you're putting somebody in kind of a critical role, like you're putting them on your safety and security team, you're putting them in your children's ministry areas, those are people that you need to know who they are. You need to know their character. You need to know their conduct. You need to know their sincerity of their faith and everything that they're professing and putting themselves forward to be. And the only way you're going to do that is to observe this person and get to know that person for a while. So a lot of the churches I work with, they put 6 months requirement. You have to be part of this organization for 6 months. And then what you're doing in the meantime is you're watching. So maybe they show up. Hey, I just moved here last week from Alabama and I'm ready to do something. Oh, cool. Well, we have a 6-month waiting period. Okay. Now you're going to just watch them. Is this person coming regularly? Are they engaged in the church? Are they doing more than just showing up on Sunday? Have they found a small group or a life group to engage in? Are they working in your hospitality ministry, maybe, you know, making coffee? Like, is this person really sincere, or are they just waiting for that door to the children to open up so that they can have access? So, and then some churches require membership. Not all churches have that, but these are just things for you to consider. But these are opportunities for you to watch. Now, some people will say, if I have to put off a volunteer for 6 months, I'm going to lose a volunteer. Well, you don't have to put them off entirely. Perhaps what you do is you say, hey, we do have a 6 months requirement. We've got your application. We can do everything else. We can start your background. We can do the interview. We can get you ready. And then from that, you decide, yeah, so far we like this person, but they've still got to wait their 6 months. Well, instead of just sitting there for 6 months and doing nothing and this person possibly losing interest, maybe what you could do in those 6 months is, instead of waiting for that 6 months to pass and then say, all right, Ken, you're all clear to come to work or to come and volunteer. And now you're going to sit down and give me all kinds of training to do. I've got to do the child protection plan, and I've got to learn, you know, all of the policies and procedures, and maybe there's, I don't know, 6 hours of training. I've got to do CPR, first aid, all of this different stuff. How about you just, let's just make it easy. There's 6 hours of training that your organization requires. You spread that training out over the next 6 months. Hey, 1 hour a month for the next 6 months until you are able to actually start. We're going to work on your training. And so now, instead of judging the suitability of a candidate based on your 15, 20, 30-minute interview, and how many of us have done that? How many of us interviewed somebody and saw one person, and then somebody came to work and you realized there was an entirely different person? So if you say, hey, yeah, we'd like to bring you on board, but we got to work through 6 hours of training, so we're going to do this once a month for the next 6 months. You've now got 6 hours to observe, and I can speak from personal experience how important this was. There was a time in my youth ministry, my camping ministry for children of abuse, where we would kind of make a decision right on the spot to take somebody on. And we did that with this one gal. She interviewed actually quite well, but on our way up to camp, which was not even a 45-minute drive, she needed a ride. So my wife and I picked her up, and in that 45 minutes of time, she way overshared her personal life, and we knew everything about all of her marital problems down to sex issues with her and her husband. And it was just and I'm not just talking about, she just kind of alluded, it was wholly inappropriate material, and that really kind of opened our eyes that, yeah, we need to wait. And so what we started doing there is we would wait till after training, and we would use these 2 full days of training. That gave us 2 full days to observe this person and how they interacted with others and how they conducted themselves. So anyways, so I spent a lot of time on that. And then a really big part of your background check are these reference checks. You're gonna want to check with family, friends, acquaintances, current and former supervisors and coworkers, current and former landlords and neighbors, current and former pastors, ministry leaders, ministry peers, peer workers, and then even get secondary references. When you talk to any of these folks, just ask them, hey, is there somebody else that you know that can attest to the conduct and the character of this person? Because most people are going to give you the people that are going to speak most highly about them. So if you ask these people that you're talking to, hey, do you know somebody else? Now you're really getting a good feel. And by the way, I'm not wholly opposed to checking with family and friends, but just keep in mind, these are people that are closest. So while you could argue they are the people that know the applicant the best, they are also the people that are most likely to overlook the flaws that this person might have because they want to support them in their endeavor, and they're going to speak highly of them and maybe gloss over that person's flaws. And that's where like these secondary references come in. These are maybe people that know them, but that are not as close, and that might speak a little more frankly with you about the person. So it gives you a chance to reach out to other people with information on the the applicant's character, conduct, their honesty, integrity, reputation, their mode of living. And then a really important part of a proper background check also is the verification of information. You just can't take what they wrote or what they say on face value. You're going to want to look at their application, look at their resume, listen to their interview, listen to what their references have to say, and you're going to want to compare that to cross reference it and compare it. So you want to be looking for like continuity of employment and residency, because if the person says that, yeah, I worked at McDonald's for 5 years from this date to this date, if you just take that on face value, oh, that's a McDonald's job, not a big deal, I'm not going to call them and bother them and do it. But if you did, you found out that, oh no, that person didn't work for McDonald's for 5 years. They worked for McDonald's for 3.5 years, and they covered 18 months of either unemployment or maybe there was a job where they left McDonald's. They had a job for 18 months, and that's a job they got fired from. But they extended their employment, the back end of one employment. They extended the front end of another employment to kind of close a gap, if that makes sense. Because they want to make it look like they were here and then they went straight to their next employer, when in fact, they just stretched the dates to close an 18-month gap in the middle to hide a job from where they were fired for stealing, for example. So you'll want to pay attention to things like employment dates and residency dates. The landlord says that, yeah, the guy moved out in December of 2020, but the applicant said he lived there until, December of 2021. What happened with that 1 year? Why did he extend that date? Where was he? Does he had an apartment? He got, I don't know, he got booted out of that apartment. So those are, and the information that you derive from that may not in itself be telling of too much, other than there looks like there might be some deceit or some cover up. It'll certainly at least cause you to ask more questions about, hey, what's going on here? Why were these dates off? Why did we close? What happened in here? The other part is when you talk to these people, if you talk to the McDonald's, you say, oh yeah, he left and he took a job for Burger King. And then you look at it and you go, he didn't list a Burger King. And then you find out, oh, that's the job he got fired from. Okay. So look at continuity of dates, continuity of employment, continuity of residency, and then be a little bit suspicious of missing information. And the other part I would really encourage you is press them on their reasons for leaving. Like, why did they move from a residence, or why did they leave an employer? So if he said he worked at McDonald's and he took a job at Burger King, but when you say, like, what's the reason for leaving McDonald's to accept employment at Burger King? That's non-responsive. Of course, that's the reason you left. I can see that by the work history. I really want to know, why did you leave McDonald's? Why did you leave one fast food place to take a job at another one? Like, and the reason should be something like, I had better opportunity for promotion, I got more pay, I had better hours, or the answer that he might be covering up is, I got fired. So don't let people give you vague answers on why they left someplace. Like, press them on it. If they just say to accept new employment. Yeah, Rachel? You're muted, Rachel, by the way. There you go.
Yeah, sorry. I'm in the office. I didn't want to bug you guys with the printer. So really quick before you get too far in, I did have a question about the background checks.
Yep.
Our staff did another training that I wasn't able to go to, so we're comparing all of our notes on this issue. But the background checks with the feds does not cover someone's name being on the sexual abuser list. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, was there more to your question, or was that it?
So well, kind of the follow-up is that something that we need to do ourselves, of checking if those names are on those lists, or is that something we hire out to do?
No, I wouldn't hire it out. So that's a great question. It was something I was going to cover. So
awesome.
when you run a FBI or DOJ check, it does not check sex offender registries. What it does look for is, it looks for offenses that would put somebody on a sex offender registry, but it doesn't directly check the registry. Now you could say, well, I trust it. If the offense to put a person on the registry is not there, then they're probably not on the registry. I don't know if I would want to do that. Accessing Megan's Law is very easy for any one of you. All you have enough information on an employment or volunteer application to do that yourself. I would just plug them in. Even though you did the FBI check, the DOJ check, I would still just plug them in, and I wouldn't hire somebody to do that. It's so easy to access yourself based on, as long as you verify that this person is who they say they are on the application, plug that information and go to meganslaw.com, I believe, type it in, and it'll tell you whether they're on there. And I would do that above and beyond the live scan check. Does that answer your question, Rachel?
It does. Does Megan's Law cover just the state of California, or is that nationwide? Because our area of the state has a lot of military families. So we have a lot of people coming in from other states. And like you said, if they've only lived here for 2 months, then the California background check only covers those 2 months.
Yeah. Funny. I don't know that I've ever thought that. No, I don't. I think it's national. I don't believe Megan's Law is a California thing.
We'll get to the bottom of that. I think it might be, Ken. I just put the link in the chat here, but by the time we're done with this workshop, we'll share that information. Great question.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then just one other thing, since we're talking about that too, keep in mind that not all offenses are equal in all states to put people on registries. There might be an offense in one state that's registrable, and in another state it's not, or it could even have been adjudicated in such a way that the judge found the person guilty, not the judge. Well, it could be a court trial where the judge found them guilty, or a jury trial where a jury found them guilty, but allowed them not to be required to register. So that's why your background has to be multifaceted. You can't just put all your eggs in one basket and count on one source to give you the whole picture. That's why you want to do all of the stuff: the application, the interview, watching them during attendance, during training, doing reference checks, verifying information. You would also, sex offender registries. You can also, a lot of counties also have portals that you can get to, and you should have enough information in the application that you can even just go to the public portal, type it in, and you can look at. Now that's going to take a lot more work, and you're going to have to read through like court dockets to see what it is, but you'll be able to see some information on there. And that varies from state to state and county to county, but in some places you can do that. So, and just to be clear again, this is stuff that a lot of this stuff is stuff you can do on your own. It's also stuff that you can farm out to a private investigator. And some of it is stuff that's part of the online background checks. They do some of it, not really all of it. But again, to be clear, you have to do live scan minimally. Okay.
Ken, I just dropped in the Federal Department of Justice National Sex Offender Registry link here.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, I learned something new too.
Sorry, I just confirmed with one of my coworkers who's very well versed in law. So she said that when someone moves to the state of California who's on the sex offender list, they have to notify the state within 5 days that they are a registered sex offender. So like you said, it'd probably be better to check both lists. But that is,
you're trusting
that is
them
a
to actually
window.
report, right?
Right.
Yeah, and on top of it, if you just say, oh, well, if they come from out of state and they're registered in another state, they have to register over here. Also, how long does it take some of that stuff to update? I don't know. What if you checked it right in that time where maybe the offender was compliant, but it didn't hit the system and you missed it, right? So the more places you can look for information, the better you are, because the ultimate goal is, protecting our kids. So, all right. So the next piece of this of AB 506 is the requirement that youth serving organizations develop and implement child prevention policies and procedures. It's minimally including a child safety and protection plan, particularly to ensure the reporting of suspected incidents of child abuse, and meaning to entities outside. In other words, mandated reporter. This is not talking about, hey, you have to go tell the lead pastor. That was probably part of the problem, is things were being kept inside, and so created this law that, hey, your organization has to have policies, procedures, and protocols that require this outside reporting. And then I told you I would talk about this more. The presence of at least 2 mandated reporters whenever around kids, they added the language to the greatest extent possible. So the way they wrote this before is there had to be 2 adults. I imagine that organizations complained that we don't have enough volunteers. This was cumbersome. It was unfeasible. And so I guess in a sort of concession, when they modified this 9 months later, they added the words to the greatest extent possible. So it went from reading requiring the presence of 2 mandated reporters whenever administrators, employees, or volunteers are in contact with the supervising children. It added the words to the greatest extent possible. The way I see that is it literally yanked the teeth out of this law. It's kind of like saying it is illegal to speed if you can avoid it. Like, it's either illegal or it's not, right? So here they're saying you're supposed to have 2 people as much as possible. So what they have done essentially is they have made it permissive for organizations to have less than 2 people, because if they didn't have the staffing, then I suppose to the greatest extent possible they met it. The problem is that a lot of what we're talking about here, this language stuff, it's not even defined. And we always say this, like in a lot of aspects of ministry where ministry and law collide, is, yeah, they didn't really define that. So you know how this is going to get defined? It's going to get defined in court. It's going to get defined by litigation. And so that's why we always push for maintaining the best practices, because I don't believe any of you have a ministry because you want to go forward and be, raise the flag and be the test case in court for, well, that was to the greatest extent possible. We tried, but it didn't work and somebody got hurt anyways. So again, just because you can have less than 2 people doesn't mean you should. Less than 2 adults is permissive, but it's not a best practice. And again, like the fox that exploits the weakness in the hen house, if your organization says, nope, we always have 2 adults present, and this organization says, we can't get enough volunteers, so we try to, or we have somebody that checks into every classroom every 15 minutes, says second set of eyes, pops in, and they move on and they check in. Well, that's a lot of time with an adult that's not there for kids. That's a lot of opportunity for a child to be hurt. And that's our priority, is to protect children. But the other part is you want to protect your volunteers, your volunteers and your staff. They are not expendable. They're not disposable. Oh, well, yay, Charlie got accused of child molest. Let's just move on and get a new person. The other reason that you have 2 adults present is so that there is a witness there, either one, to prevent that other person from taking advantage of a kid, because there's now an unrelated second set of eyes that doesn't allow that predator to hurt that child. Or the flip side of that is there's a second set of eyes to say that what that child said never happened. Just because they're children doesn't mean that it is not uncommon, by the way, for children to make false allegations or to take something that happened to them at the hands of one person and kind of project that onto another person. And even if it couldn't be proven, let's just say, yeah, you went with this to the greatest extent possible, and then one of your male volunteers got accused. And of course, there's not enough evidence, so they never got convicted. They didn't even get arrested. But what do you think that does for that person's reputation? What do you think it does for the reputation of your ministry, of your church, your Little C church, or the global church? It is just not a good practice. It is not a best practice. And again, just because you can have fewer than 2 doesn't mean that you should. And we highly discourage that from being a common practice. So now the next thing we want to talk about is this child protection plan, or the program. So a child protection plan is it's really just a set of policies, procedures, and practices that's enacted or adopted by a youth serving organization with plans to actively prevent harm and abuse. These plans should largely focus on preventative actions that provide like guidelines and rules and expectations and standards and boundaries and all of that stuff that are all designed to protect children from harm and abuse, whether that harm or abuse is intentional, whether it's deliberate or unintentional. And again, like I just said, it not only is aimed at keeping kids safe, but it also protects your volunteers, your staff, your ministry, and the church. And Jeff said it up at the very beginning: a child safety or child protection, it's arguably the single most important risk management tool for youth organizations. It does have to be, it does have to be, have a foundation of good governance. And that would be things like your child protection plan would include things like the organization's spiritual and biblical, a statement on the organization's spiritual and biblical values that define like the organization's commitment to protect children. It's very affirmatively stated that we don't tolerate any abuse of children, and then that child safety and protection is of the highest priority in this church. It should include a code of conduct that defines abuse as unacceptable. And then it should institute a child protection plan that includes people who are responsible for not only developing and overseeing compliance with that plan, but that also conducts like annual reviews of those plans to ensure that they stay current. A child protection plan, laws change a lot. It should be a living, breathing document that somebody's looking at constantly and making tweaks to. We already talked about as well that, so the child protection plan would also describe the worker screening process. How do you get volunteers and employees on board that are safe with kids? This would apply to everybody, every employee, every volunteer with access to minors. And again, it would include that written application, verification of identity, face-to-face interviews, minimum church attendance, and or even membership requirements, live scan, comprehensive background checks, and following all of those steps that I just gave you. But after that, once you've vetted and you've got that qualified person on board, it can't stop there. You have to have your people have to be trained, and this too will be spelled out in the child protection plan. Now, for purposes of AB 506, the minimum requirement for people, for volunteers or for workers with children will be child abuse recognition and mandated reporter training. That's the minimum that's required, but there's so much more that you can do to prepare your volunteers and your staff, and to helping your people even be more ready and able to protect. But you could talk about things like the check-in and check-out procedure. These could all be broken down in little pieces, so that you constantly have ongoing training for your people. Maybe check-in and check-out procedures, appropriate versus inappropriate contact with youth, appropriate boundaries, including social media, if you even allow it at all. A lot of organizations do not allow anything more than maybe a like or a smile or something, an emoji, but there's no real direct interaction on social media because it's a gateway in, and it's a difficult one for you to control. Maybe anti-bullying, anti-harassment, vehicle operations, if your church provides transportation, behavior management, diffusion, de-escalation, CPR, first aid, AED, all of that stuff. I mean, there's so much in there. You are not limited on what you can provide, especially in the realm of children's ministry, on what you can provide for your folks. I already talked about spreading that initial training out 6 months as like an extension of your vetting tool of your volunteers. But your child protection plan should also call for like written acknowledgements of these policies and these procedures acknowledging the code of conduct, acknowledging the value statement and all that. So people can say, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was expected of me. And in addition to what's required by AB 506. And then the child protection plans would also discuss operational issues, everything from access control to children's areas, access and protocols regarding visitors to children's ministry areas, toileting and restroom policies, safety at special events. Just because we have a special event, it's outside of the classrooms, maybe it's out in the parking lot, or maybe we're going on a field trip, doesn't mean that all of the rules are a little looser here because it's more difficult. Like, you still have to have child protection plans that work for special events and for off-site things. How do you supervise kids? What's your ratios? What's your expectations? What do you do for overnight policies? Maybe you have camp or things like that. Transportation policies, even policies regarding home and small groups. You know, that, hey, this has to be an officially sanctioned small group if you're going to be covered by the churches. Otherwise, it's just folks meeting on their own. And then parental notification, so that there are policies in place that things are happening and parents are not left in the dark that, oh, I didn't know my child was going to be involved in that kind of an event. And then probably the last important piece on a comprehensive child protection plan, it would include components that cover response. Like, what happens when there is an allegation? You know, how do we respond what is our response in crisis? How do we respond to allegations? How do we document it? Who gets notified? What is the investigations process? Who handles communications of matters regarding this allegation, especially if it goes public? Like, who talks to the parents? Who talks to law enforcement? Who talks to the media? Who talks to congregation? And then prioritizing the investigation. A lot of churches want to rush to the investigation, but they have to recognize that if law enforcement's involved, law enforcement has maybe a different priority on this investigation, and that's like regarding matters of proof. And it might require, in fact, I would say it most probably requires the church to kind of take a step back and let that investigation progress, so that so that the church does not interfere with the criminal investigation. So they might have to sit back, let that take place first, and then working with the investigators once they know an investigation is closed and complete, and that the church can now start reaching out and talking to people. They can do so safely without fear of damaging a criminal case or tainting people's memories, because investigations like this are very, very sensitive. A lot of times there is not evidence in child sexual abuse cases, and the only thing that the child really has going for them is their credibility. And so if an investigation isn't conducted properly, there is a risk of tainting a child and then throwing the whole thing out the window, and thus like depriving that child and their family of like due process and the right to see, justice done because somebody said something wrong. And I'll just give you an example like that. If a child came up to you and said something like, told one of your nursery workers that he touches me down there, most of us can think like right away what comes to our mind, like what that might mean. If you say something like you react with shock and like, what? Your dad touches you on your private parts? You have just tainted that child. You threw two ideas in there, that it was the father and that it was the private parts being touched, when maybe the kid is just simply trying to say, no, grandpa touches my feet and tickles my feet when he helps me in the morning to put my socks on. It's just something completely innocent. So the way that children and even witnesses are talked to has to be very strategic, so that you are not planting ideas in their head. Questions have to be asked open-minded. In fact, since I threw that out, some of you might have a question. about the way how you would respond to that. If a child said something like, "Hey, he touches me down there," and you don't know how to respond to that, a simple question would be, "Who touches you?" And then, "What do you mean down there?" Just like open-ended. "Who touches you?" "Oh, my grandpa." "Like where?" "Oh, on my feet." "Like, and then why?" "Oh, when he tickles my feet when he puts my shoes on." "Oh, thank goodness, that's all it was." So I think that might be all I have to say about child protection plans. Jeff, they're really comprehensive. You could take a stab at writing it. That's also something that we do. We don't take stabs at it. We're actually pretty good at it. But we could write a child protection plan for you. But you could also take a stab at, just know there's a lot to cover. And it's going to be something that you're going to want to run past your insurer and your attorney too before you implement it. You draft it, throw it together, and then let somebody take a look at it. So.
Ken, super helpful. Thank you so much. That's great. I know it's a lot of information, and so want to make sure that we've got just some next steps, some available resources, and then we're going to take some questions. Okay, here in just one second.
Sorry, I feel like I made you just drink from a fire hose, so apologies.
No, that's all right. I tried to give you all a framework to think about child protection in the comments there, just thinking through governance, screening and training of workers, your child safety operations. You also want to make sure that when you are going off campus, maybe you're going to camp or a retreat or some sort of overnight activity, that you've got a plan for that as well. And then, of course, having a response plan before there's ever an allegation of abuse. And by allegation of abuse, we think in terms of internal abuse. Something has happened, an incident has happened in one of your ministry programs when minors are in the care of the ministry, or external, maybe a sharp, attentive child care worker has noticed some sort of indicator of abuse and is then reporting it. So there's just a little bit of an outline for you. So where do we start, and what resources are available? I want to make sure that you get the link to Church HR Network and some of the resources that they have to help you, both from putting together that child protection policy, for the training, and so much more that they provide, as well as what we can do for you at ECAP. Again, check out the child safety standards, which I linked to in the chat, and we'll be sure to include for the recording in the future. But ECAP child safety standards were developed by a team of experts, and the standards are the highest above any sort of state law, any sort of legal requirement throughout all 50 states and U.S. territories. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that as you're striving for that. Obviously, you want to be compliant with the California law, AB 506, as we've been talking about today, but then excel still more, we would say, and strive for compliance to those child safety standards that ECAP has developed, and check out the accreditation program that we've mentioned. So this is a lot of information. Where do I start? Of course, be mindful of the time requirements. It sounds like while this is the law of the land of California, the state of California is supposedly going to be starting to enforce this in January. We don't know, unless Ken, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we don't know specifically what that's going to look like. But it does sound like everyone's on notice that that's happening in January, and that's why we wanted to make this training available to you. The first thing that I would direct you to, in addition to these resources, would be number one, starting with your leadership, making a commitment to keeping the vulnerable safe. And that sounds a little bit like a formality, but it's super important that they support your child protection measures, that they sustain these through approving policies and providing the funding that you need. And so that's really one of the best places to start. After that, think about the ownership principle. How do I make sure that these child protection measures are consistently applied whenever minors are in the care of the church? So I might have nursery, I might have children's ministry, I may have youth ministry, midweek programs, whatever that might be. And each of those programs may have a different leader. So we would encourage you to find one single owner, if you will, for the child protection measures. We call that person a child safety coordinator. And there's some articles that we have have on our website about that role. That person should be a part of a child safety team that has the leadership of those other ministry programs that come together to work together. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. We've been working with churches for the last couple of years now, and I'm amazed that when I show up in the room and I just by showing up at a church, we've brought all these people together. I'm hearing a children's ministry director turn to the youth pastor and say, well, what do you do for screening? And one company is being used by youth and another company is being used by the kids. And so it's just a great way to bring everybody onto the same page with a child safety team. You might also include some sort of pastoral or executive leadership on that team. And we think it's a good idea to also include a parent to serve on that team. Well, one of the things that we could do to help you is an initial assessment. I'm going to ask Brigham to share a link. And so we provide a service that we believe is reasonably priced to come in and help you assess your child protection program. We do that through document sharing. It's not an on-site audit like we would do for accreditation. But we can help you assess what you're doing and then to take some steps moving forward. So really you get a written report that can be used as a sort of roadmap moving forward. And so those are some 3 steps that we would encourage you to take moving forward. Number 1, leadership support. Number 2, the ownership principle. Have a child safety coordinator help lead this like a new ministry of the church. We've found ministries really struggle to move forward on this if they take all of these things, talk about everything that fire hydrant that Ken shared with us, great, helpful information, but a lot. And so that can be overwhelming to somebody who's already got a full plate of work. So smaller churches are typically going to find a new volunteer to lead in this role, someone who's administratively gifted to serve as that child safety coordinator. Larger churches will sometimes have an HR team, and they oftentimes will run point on child protection measures. So number 1, leadership. Number 2, ownership. Have that child safety coordinator provide leadership and ownership for these child protection measures. And then number 3, assess where you're at and the work that you're doing, and just start taking baby steps moving forward. All right, let's take some questions. Who's got
Jeff?
Yes, sir.
Jeff, hey, real quick, this Ken. Before we move on to I want to piggyback on these points and just because of my law enforcement background and then my role at Church HR Network and Safety and Security, I really just push for the safety and security side of it. And so like this child safety team that Jeff was talking about, perhaps you could include a member of your church's safety and security team on it as well. I like to say that rather than creating a so when I talk to churches about building safety and security, we like to kind of look at it from the perspective of we're not here to build a we're not here to build a safety and security ministry for the sake of creating a new ministry. Really, what we should be trying to do is building safety and security into all of our ministries. And so a great way to do that would be on this child protection team to include somebody. And a great example is there was a church in the San Diego area that had a brand new leader who had transplanted from out of state, and he had taken, this church sponsored a scout troop. And this church leader had arranged to go to a nature preserve. And he even checked it out a few weeks prior to the event. It looked safe. Safety and security from the church wasn't involved in it. This gentleman was new to the area. And what he didn't realize is that the preserve he was taking these kids to was Black's Beach, which is a clothing optional beach. And he had checked out that church on a day that was cold, and so there was nobody there. And he went there with the kids on a day that was hot, and so the place was pretty populated. And the church and that leader, unfortunately, took kind of a beating. It was a completely innocent mistake. But if they had like church, like safety was involved in it, somebody would have, that would have been the thing that might have been caught if there were like more eyes on it to say, oh, where are you going? Hey, that's right next to Black's Beach. We're not going to go there. So just an example, if you include safety and security as part of all your ministries, rather than like building it as a separate tower,
Yeah, that's really good. And Ken, my guess is you've got a lot of horror stories like that. Good night. Robin, I see you. Go ahead with your first question there.
Yeah, so kind of coming off the horror story, as well as a lot of the conversation has been searching for people who are registered predators versus protocols in, so we're a youth theater company, and some of the feedback that we've received and protocols that we've put into place regarding placing of microphones. So when we have to physically touch a child, so you have students with special needs that sometimes need deep pressure hugs, or you're at a VBS and they run up to you and they hug you, or you're having to put their camp t-shirt on, or just times when we have to physically engage with a child. Do you have written materials to help with the training of that? Does that make sense? Like, we can do all the things that we need to do, but quite honestly, California is a sue happy state. That's just where we're at. And so a parent or somebody from outside that goes, hey, I want to send my kid to this VBS, or I want to send my kid to this camp, or I want to send my kid to this program, and they're Christians, which when the word Christian is used, there's a assumption of safety, right? That's just naturally put on the word Christian. Is there something that you guys provide or offer resources just to kind of help those trainings and protocols on this is how you should communicate with parents to say, we're going to put this t-shirt on, or we're going to put this, for us, it would be a microphone, or, you know, those times when it's going to be that we're going to have to physically touch your child. And these are the protocols that we go through in order to make sure that these adults are safe. And this is appropriate touch and not appropriate touch. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great
Okay.
question. Ken, do you want to take that?
Yeah. So I don't have like unfortunately like an out of the box like product to offer you. We include that kind of thing like in our child protection plan when we write them up, and we do have an entire section that we talk about like appropriate talk, touch, and territory. You know, basically it's a boundaries thing. Hey, you know, we talk about only things that are edifying and positive. We don't talk about, like, we can talk about, you know, hey, I like your new shoes, versus hey, that dress makes, you know, really shows off your body, like, you know, that kind of thing, boundaries things. And then plus we also, like, you know, we have some things like guidelines on, like you were talking about, like hugging and all that stuff. And we've always trained our volunteers like, hey, yeah, your kid charges you and gives you a full-on front-to-front hug, you know, you're not going to freak out, and maybe just like kind of do that and then sort of turn and redirect it if you can. But yeah, I get it. It's challenging because all of the things that you talked about there, Robin, that is like protection kind of seems very like opposed to like the way that we kind of show like love and affection to kids who need it. So so I don't know, what's my answer? Do I have some stuff? Yes. Yes, we have some material, but and it's offered. We have material through HR 360, which is a subscription service of Church HR Network. And by the way, if you guys didn't see it in the chat, right above where a couple of clicks above, where did it go? Anyways, I put our website in there along with our phone number so that you could kind of learn more about who we are and what we have and how you can access that kind of stuff. So
I'm going to ask Brigham to repost that, Ken. Thank you so much. And Robin, we're thrilled to have Christian Youth Theater join ECAP as an affiliate. And so I'm actually coming to the DFW area in January. I don't know if you'll be there, but we're committed to supporting CYT across the country in all of your branches with child protection. And so I think that's one of those areas that we can work together, adopt a special code of conduct specifically to your context and your programs, and then share those kind of expectations and policies with branches across the country. So I don't mean to punt on your great question, but that sounds like a very, context specific question. And so let's have a conversation.
Not entirely, only because, and I speak, I'm a pastor's kid. My husband's a pastor at a church, and they do programming, right? Like the children's Christmas pageant, or they do a choir performance. And I know we have a lot of church leaders that are here specifically. and there are microphones, or there's placements, or there's costumes, or there's VBS shirts and things like that that are utilized. And it's, also as a mom, and hey, let me help you put your t-shirt on, right? Like we do that just to help, and we love our kids, and we want to be able to love on them. But at the same time, I want to make sure that I'm above reproach, and that I'm exemplifying proper mannerisms with children, and that a child feels safe. Ultimately, I would never want a child to feel unsafe. And I know that that's true for all the leaders that are here today. That's why we're all here, is just to say, that's all that we're trying to do, is just create a safe environment. Totally. And here, specifically within the state of California, with all the laws and things that happen here specifically within our state, we're just trying to continue to love on them the way that Jesus would love on them, right? Like, come to me, come sit around, and let's just sit down, let's have a conversation. But yet we have to check all these boxes. So how do we define that? So I asked the question as generally as I could. And I know that since you know CYT, yes, we're a youth theater company, and we're specific to specific needs, but it does carry over, because I know our church does children's programming, and they put on plays, and they put on things where we have contracts, and that the student has to sign and the parent has to sign to say, it's going to be me putting a cord down your back, or, all the things, or helping you put the shirt on, or costume changes for pageants and things like that. So yeah.
Let me give you three things that may not solve all of your problems, but it's a good place to start. And then we can have a follow-up conversation on this. Number one would be to define what's appropriate, what's inappropriate in your code of conduct, and to teach that. Number two would be, as much as you possibly can, if the student's able to put that on themselves, that might be an option. And number three would be the supervision. So as long as you've got the right supervision in place, then putting on a microphone and putting on a shirt and these other things is done in the witness of other adults and maybe even other kids. I think that's going to solve a lot of your challenges there. So let's have another follow-up conversation if that doesn't solve your particular question there. And I'm just trying to get to some of these other questions. Now, I'm going to mess up this name. Danes, is that how you say your name?
It's Danish, but that's right.
And I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the information. It might be a repetitive or very simple question. But if I understood it right, you recommend a live scan for all employees and all volunteers to be done, like no exceptions, and that's the best practice. And then a part of that would be, if I am the custodian of records, do I need to live scan myself? So we have a record of my own, since I had to do a live scan to become a custodian of records, but do I still need to do a new one for our own records?
That's a good question. I'm going to ask Ken's help, but first of all, to clarify, the live scan is state law, so it's not just best practice. Although we would say doing a background check in other parts of the country and checking the National Sex Offender Registry, that would be best practice. But the live scan with the DOJ in the state of California is state law. So I just want to differentiate between those two terms. Ken?
Yeah, and so the only wiggle room on the live scan under AB 506 is as it relates to volunteers. So you may have some volunteers who volunteer below that threshold, who don't need to be live scanned according to AB 506. Those are the ones who are saying, I would just do it anyways, because otherwise you're trading the convenience of not live scanning them you're opening up the door to predators getting in, because that's your weak point. And you're going to have the challenge now of keeping track of which of my volunteers are safe and which ones are not. Because you can imagine, let's say you have somebody that hasn't been live scanned and they've been this low-level volunteer for all these years, but you're used to seeing them. You've known them for 5 years, and one day you go, hey, Ken, come on over here. I need you to do this real quick, totally forgetting because you just know me so well and you see me often enough that you just pull me in and you stick me in a role that I haven't technically been cleared for. So for that reason, we just recommend that you do everybody, even if they are not required. And I'm sorry, there were two parts to your question.
The other question is, so we did the live scan, we have our number, we started for some of our volunteers and employees. Do I need to submit a live scan request for my own self? So
no, you will have been live scanned. So if you are the COR, the custodian of records, in order to get that status by the DOJ, they will have live scanned
Yes.
you as part of that process. So no, you're
Okay.
you're fine.
Okay. Thank
Ken,
you so much.
can I jump in there real fast with a clarifying comment? This is Adam Wilson
Go ahead,
with Wilson Solutions. Let me get my video. I'm in transit right now, but I appreciate this so much, guys. Thank you so much for putting this on. I actually flooded the DOJ with questions. They have several inquiry emails that you can send emails to if you have questions. One of them is specifically for COR inquiries, and they did confirm that you do need to be live scanned with your organization in order to even if you are a COR. Because I asked the same thing. I felt logically they already got live scanned with the DOJ. The DOJ is going to tell me if something happens with them, but since they're not sharing that Corey information, that's their logic, is that you do have to be live scanned as a COR with your organization, not just with the DOJ, to qualify as a COR.
So thank you for that. You know what? Actually, that logically does make sense, because if DOJ is live scanning you, it's to make sure that you're clear for their purposes and getting their COR status. But if you were to, there's no way to check off, say, the subsequent arrest notification, because that subsequent notification would go to the DOJ and not the organization. So actually that does make sense, because otherwise the wrong originating agency is monitoring you. So yeah, so I'm sorry, I stand corrected on that. That makes sense.
Yeah,
Great.
they want to,
Thank you.
they don't want to carry the liability for notifying the organization if they get a subsequent arrest notification. And you can
Yeah.
have multiple CORs as well. So the other thing that didn't make sense was, well, if you only have one COR, it's kind of a conflict of interest, because they'll be the only one receiving their subsequent arrest notification. But you can have multiple CORs, and so that helps to kind of widen that accountability aspect.
Adam, super helpful. Really appreciate that. Hey, Autumn, I've got a copy of Safeguards in the mail to you. Go ahead with your question.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
My question has to do with reporting and kind of the discretion of church leadership. So at our church, we spent like the last year working on our child protection policy document and really beefing it up and trying to be compliant to the best of our ability with AB 506. And really what we're trying to, we have a policy in place, but what we're trying to refine is our reporting procedures. And when it comes to kind of suspicious behavior or indications of an abuse and neglect, we're really kind of looking for guidance on, at what point, like what triggers the need to report, because our volunteers don't meet the hour requirements to be considered mandatory reporters. They're only with, they're just, we only see the kids for maybe half an hour on a Sunday. So specifically, if I can give an example, like if we see a child who's maybe showing indicators of neglect, coming to church and, hungry or in ragged clothes, like, do we just see that, document it and report it, or is there the possibility for discretion for us to maybe meet with the family and say, is there a need that we can accommodate for you? Do we need to do meal trains? Do you need financial support? We're trying to figure out, what those triggers to report for abuse or neglect, what those triggers are.
So mandated reporting laws require mandated reporters to report known or suspected abuse. So it's really almost a matter of like kind of what's in your head. So really, if there's suspected abuse, your question has a couple layers to it, because you've got people that aren't technically not mandated reporters, right? So let's just look at it this way first. If there's known abuse, that's really clear. Everybody's going to just report that. If there's suspected abuse, if you have enough in your mind that you suspect there's abuse, you should report it. And really, I always say, if you're in doubt, report it. Let the professionals, let law enforcement, let Child Protective Services look into it. You're not in a position to dig deep enough, and it's neither your role or your responsibility to be the person to do that. I'd be really careful about contacting a family first. So I get it. It's one of your families in your own church, and you don't want to call. But if they suspect the abuse, then they should call. Now, if you're saying that they don't really suspect it, but they just kind of see a need, but they're not necessarily suspecting, so it's hard to answer because it's really kind of what's in their head. Do they suspect abuse? Then report it. If they're not suspecting abuse, but they think there's a need, like, oh, their poor kid is always dressed ragtag and he's often dirty and everything. Okay, well, it's not necessarily abusive. There's different levels of okayness right there, I guess. And maybe that would be one where you could check it. But I guess if I was to distill it all the way down, if they're in doubt, they should report it. And especially for your volunteers who are volunteering at a fairly low level, if they're not even taking the class, that's even more like lost information that they don't have on which to base a report. So like Jeff talked, if you have a child a safety coordinator in your organization, or at least a ministry leader, whoever's in charge of that particular ministry, nursery or whatever, at least that person, by a what they call it. So your volunteers that are below the threshold, they're what would be called a permissive reporter. They're allowed to report, and they're protected legally. If they're wrong, they can't get sued over, oh, you called me a child abuser. They're protected. They're a permissive reporter. They can report, but if they're not comfortable with it, that's a time where they can go to another person, their ministry leader. They can go to the pastor. They can go to the child safety coordinator and report it. Now, since we're talking about that, I'll just say, but if you are yourself a mandated reporter, you can still tell like your boss or your supervisor, and you can jointly decide to report, but your boss, for example, cannot take that responsibility off of you. So if I was your boss and I said, oh, hey, don't worry about it, Autumn, I'll report it, and I failed to report it, you're the one that's going to get in trouble because it was your duty to report. So it's kind of like a no harm, no foul. If I told you I'd call, if I called and I did call, then you're safe. But if I told you I would call and I didn't, you're the one that takes the fall on that. So, the burden lies with you.
So if I may ask a follow-up question from a law enforcement perspective, if our permissive reporters then go to, say, myself, I am the children's ministry coordinator, and they say, Autumn, I'm noticing these patterns and they're kind of giving me some concern. I'm the mandated reporter and they're not. But does that compromise the chain of evidence for us to have that kind of conversation? Because I was under the impression that from like a witness integrity standpoint, they're not supposed to seek kind of outside counsel. They're just supposed to report factually what they observe to either CPS or law enforcement.
Well, they will. I mean, so you'd be the one to just file the form and submit it, and to either make the call. So you either call law enforcement and submit the report of suspected abuse to that same agency, or you call CPS, and then within the prescribed time you submit your follow-up, you fax them that report. But they're still going to want to talk to the person that initially came. It's just that they're a low-level volunteer. You're not like suddenly thrusting this administrative responsibility on them. So you're just kind of taking that, you're just helping them make it happen, but they're not out of the picture.
Yeah, that's right.
I just does that answer your question, Autumn?
It does. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, because it seems like we can still exercise some discretion, but we don't have to, like you said, shoulder them with an administrative responsibility.
Yeah, especially if they haven't, if they're that low level volunteer and they haven't even done the training, then yeah, you can help facilitate that for them.
Well, and I just want to emphasize a couple of points here. So at ECAP, while again, we're highlighting here what's required by law in California, we would want you to train all of your workers, all of your volunteers, even if they're not required for training. We would love for you to train anyone that works with children and youth. And this really gets to the heart of the issue here, is that if we can mobilize all of our workers to understand common grooming behaviors, indications of abuse and sexual abuse, then they're going to be better equipped to notice those things and to take action and to let someone know. So again, we're kind of falling to the lowest level, if you will, through the state law requirements, but we'd love to challenge you to go above and beyond, which would be to include mandatory reporting training for all of your workers, regardless of whether they actually are mandatory reporters. Here in Florida, it's really quite simple. We don't have designated roles or positions. It's just any adult that suspects abuse. And I believe you're going to see that kind of laws spreading across the country because of the problem of sexual abuse. So we talk about mandatory reporters, we talk about permissive reporters, and ECAP's strong position would be that you should report, again, kind of to Ken's point earlier. We believe as Christians that the government, according to Romans 13, was instituted by God to do what? To protect people. And so by doing this, by reporting this potential or suspected abuse, is really allowing the government to do what we believe God has called the government to do, which is to investigate these types of potential crimes that have taken place. And they're really best suited to do that. Now, do they always do that perfectly? No, but that is their responsibility, and we can do our part by notifying. All right, Ray, I see your question. Go ahead.
Yeah, appreciate that. I had a time trying to find the raise your hand button. I couldn't find it. Our church was aware of this back late last year, and we started going through the process, and we've received the ORI and the CORI also. But the process in California was so clunky, and they had so many problems that and they weren't responding to emails at the time when we had questions. That's the main reason I'm here. We've started the process, but I'm looking for more of input on has the process been streamlined so that they've fixed the problems in it, to your knowledge? Are you aware that there were problems? You're on mute.
Yeah. So that would not be the first time I've heard of it. And, but I cannot say that I'm aware that, I'm not saying that they didn't fix the problems, but I can't say that I'm aware that I've heard that they have. And I forget who was our gentleman earlier from
Adam
Wilson Solutions.
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
I have to say I'm impressed that he has reached the DOJ as many times as he has, because really, like, getting information on all of that is not, in my experience, has not proven to be easy at all to get answers and clarification. So, but yeah, I don't know. So I'm sorry, Ray, I don't know the answer to that. If they're working on it, or honestly, even if they're listening, I don't know.
Adam, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, and I'm not sure, Ray, if I'm understanding your the problems you're facing. I know that so maybe you can clarify if I don't get it correct, but I think because of the law and so many organizations, especially churches that were not compliant with AB 506 are now running live scans, they're being inundated with applications. And I was kind of forewarned when I went into this process that it's going to take a long time, so get your application as soon as possible. But I can say a church that I just helped go through the application process and onboarding all of this policy and procedure and training and whatnot, that I think we applied in like mid to late September, and we got approved, or August, and we got approved on October 9th. So it happened fairly quickly. There's a chance, I don't know, with the holidays, there's a chance you might be able to make the deadline, but I think the important thing is just to apply as soon as possible. And yeah, as far as information from the DOJ, I mean, I've sent them more emails than they've answered, but I've been pretty persistent and replied, hey, I sent this email. last week, still haven't heard back. Here's another question as well. So you do have to be pretty persistent to get something. And usually when you get it, it's kind of vague and I have to ask clarifying questions, but I've been chipping away at it.
Yeah, the situation I've had is we actually have our ORI. I've got an email saying, please use your agency's OAR, ORI, and mail code to submit fingerprints, and that we've been, we're at the place of onboarding our agency. But there were so many issues. They say to bookmark your AAJC site and all the different things online you have to do. It is so confusing that it's like someone was on drugs when they put this policy together and the process for how to get into it.
Maybe.
Yeah, they you know, the frustrating aspect is they're making demands through the law and then making it very difficult to procedurally honor and engage the law. So it does make it tough, and hopefully they will streamline it more. And they actually have, when I was a COR at a former organization, I think it was even more complicated, if you can believe it or not, at that time than it is now, but it's still got a long ways to go.
It's good. Robin, you've got a question.
Yeah, quick question. Do you also have procedures or any paperwork or any training for students? So, right, children range from birth to 17. And then once they turn 18, they might still be in high school and they might be serving. So do you have any support for students that then turn 18 in the middle of their high school year and they're serving, and then now all of a sudden they might be dating somebody that they've been dating for over a year? I know this is somewhat CYT specific, but it does happen in the church world where they are a student and then all of a sudden tomorrow I'm now considered an adult. And what they need to do, what is the preparation for that? How do we proceed with that? Do you have policies, procedures, things to help churches and ministries in prepping for that? For somebody to all of a sudden become an adult and they're either dating or serving with children?
That's a great question. Well, at some point, some good discernment is going to need to be exercised. First of all, in California, as I understand it, minors are not counted towards your ratio of screened and trained workers. Now, that's unfortunate. The rest of the country, ECAP encourages 16, 17-year-old mature high school students that want to serve in children's ministry, but typically those students aren't going to work in youth ministry. They're going to work in children's ministry. And so I don't know if I'm addressing your question specifically, but I wouldn't have a 17-year-old worker serving with someone that they're dating. That doesn't seem appropriate there. So I would just count them as, another participant in the program. Just because of the romantic relationship that could be taking place. So that's really where you have to use some discretion. Is that your question, Robin?
Yes and no as a participant. So let's say we've got churches here and they're doing high school camp, and they have 18-year-olds that are participating, because right now what we're talking about is protection, right? We're wanting to make sure that everybody is safe and that the 18-year-old is protected, as well as the 16-year-old that is being protected. So they're going to a youth camp and they're a senior in high school, but they're legally an adult. What type of training, what is the best practice there? So looking at it from a church standpoint, not as a CYT youth theater standpoint, right? But as a church standpoint to go, I've got an 18-year-old that is participating in programming with a 16-year-old. They're showing up on Sunday morning. They are showing up to a camp. They are showing up to an all-nighter, whatever that might look like. What are the protocols that we should have as best practices for that individual that turns 18 to protect them as well? Because what Ken was saying earlier, there are a lot of false accusations, or parents, and I'm a parent of a 14-year-old daughter, that might say, this boy tried to, hold my daughter's hand at an overnighter, and why is he making that advance? And, and we now are stuck in a serious conversation, and it might not be as far as they touched her in an inappropriate place, but we're stuck in a conversation and we're actually dealing with a legal adult. So do you guys provide guidance on that?
Yeah, I want to see what Ken has to say, but two quick things. Number one is we've got a camp resource on our website. Maybe Brigham can share a link to that. We would encourage those adults, maybe I need stronger language than encourage, but we would actually have you screen that 18-year-old participant before allowing them to participate at camp. And so we've got some experience doing that. So we would have you do a background check on that adult, that 18-year-old now. And then I think this is where your supervision, your screened and trained workers is really, really important to have the right number of ratios and the right sleeping accommodations for overnight activities. Yes, by gender, but also the right number of ratios. And that gets really tricky in some camp facilities. So go check out the camp resource that we have. And then Ken, what would you add to that?
Well, actually, you said what I was going to say is I was just really going to kind of fall back on the supervision and the arrangements for them. I hadn't really thought about, to be honest with you, I hadn't really thought about like backgrounding them. I mean, you could live scan them, but you're not going to get anything there if the kid just turned 18, of course, because any record he has is a minor and is probably, sealed or inaccessible. And I guess you could do all the rest of the aspects of a background check, like references and all that. I think it would probably weigh a lot on me, like about how well do you know this kid? Because if this has been a youth participant that you have had, in your organization for, since he was 13, for example, and so you really already know who this kid is. Like there's almost like no point in making reference calls. You know him as well as anybody else does, right? We're not making reference calls to check off boxes and say we make reference calls. We're making reference calls because we're trying to determine, the conduct and character and of somebody that's not really known to us. So if you have a kid who just kind of ages out, again, you're not going to get anything through live scan or fingerprinting, criminal history checks. I'm not really sure there's a point in making reference calls and all that. And so so I'll just be honest, I haven't really thought that all the way through, but my tendency would just be to fall back to like appropriate supervision and appropriate sleeping arrangements. And
sure, I think my question lends more probably legally by way of protection, right?
No.
Because just because they're above reproach, an 18-year-old girl or an 18-year-old boy could still have urges, right? Like, I'm just going to put it out there. We're all adults, right? To say like, I'm here with this individual that I care for, or, and something could happen. And then all of a sudden we're on the receiving end of parents being involved for the minor to the legal adult. And now we're in the middle of something that quite often is faced in public schools and out there in the public sector, but we're being sought after legally as the entity that held the function.
Yeah.
Even though they were above reproach, that doesn't matter. Things happen, right? So you sit back and you go, okay, what are the processes that we have in place to help protect the 18-year-old against either a false accusation or a blown out of proportion accusation versus a real accusation, and how do we handle that? Because that's really probably more what we would be facing.
This is really where your supervision, like we're saying, is really, really important. You do have to draw a line somewhere with background checks. And so I hear what Ken's saying, it might feel a little bit like you're checking a box, but you do have to draw a line someplace. And I'm not a big fan of arbitrary lines. And so we would encourage you at ECAP to do a background check on an 18-year-old, even though theoretically you, or most likely you're not going to find anything, but you still have to, pick a line someplace.
Shows due
Yeah, and we
diligence at
do.
least,
We
right?
live scan.
The
Yeah,
last
we
thing I
live
would
scan
say-
once they're 18.
The last thing I would say is make sure that you've got a clearly communicated code of conduct. And so we've dropped that here into the chat. We've also seen camp ministries show a required a child protection video before kids are to participate in camp. So the idea would be that your students show up at camp and they check in and they immediately go into some sort of designated theater where the child safety coordinator is there to communicate expectations on behavior at camp. What's appropriate, what's inappropriate from electronic use, anything that might be inappropriate as far as content goes, or words that might even include bullying. And so there's some really good examples. I think we could even share some here on a sample video of what those expectations are. You know, you're typically talking 5 to 7 minutes. That video might be a companion piece to a written code of conduct that's communicated to parents and students before they're even going to camp. And then, of course, you're going to have to hold kids accountable. I was a part of a camp this last summer where we sent three students home, 3 campers home, because they broke that code of conduct. And so you've got to be able to enforce that as well. All right, we've got time for one more question, and then we're going to bring this in for a landing. Okay, anybody have one last question? Ken, this has been super helpful. We've got this recording we're going to make available and a number of resources to those who've registered, and we've got your email address just to send a follow-up. And thank you for participating. Thank you for some really, really good questions here. Thank you to Church HR Network for partnering with us to make this all possible. Please be sure to go to their website, check out some of their programs and resources and products that they have available to help your ministry in California and beyond. So they're doing some really, really good work. And of course, we hope that you'll visit our website at ecap.net, where we've loaded up that website with articles and resources to be able to support you as you help keep kids safe in the ministry that you're called to do. We do this ultimately as a matter of biblical stewardship. We do this, yes, to be compliant to the laws of the land, but also because one day we will believe we will stand before King Jesus and give an account. So Ken, any final comments as we wrap this up here? Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I was kind of thinking, I think the one thing I would just leave you with is, if you go at all of this from if you're in doubt about something, I would just always encourage you to err on the side of caution and in favor of protecting a child's safety. So like if you got a potential volunteer and you're like on the fence about it, make child protection your priority and lean that way. And, you know, hey, I'm sorry, I don't think maybe this is the right time for you to volunteer here. There's still other opportunities. I just learned in my years of ministry in camp ministry with kids is I trusted my gut, and I always erred on the side of protecting the kids. And I always also, here's just one other thought if you're trying to weigh something, is think about it from the perspective of, so there's a whole spiritual aspect to it, all right, but also think about it from the perspective of, you may end up on the witness stand in court. And what are you going to testify to in front of a judge and a jury about how you came to your decision? And if you decided that, you know what, hey, this person who has a history of abuse with a child, I think he's repented, I think he's remorseful, I think he's forgiven, I think he's a transformed man, and we're going to give him yet one more chance with these kids, and he hurts somebody, how is that going to sound to a jury, right? They don't care how much you and your selection group prayed about it, or that God told you to give this guy another chance. You might as well get the checkbook out. So I just always kind of weigh things from that perspective, and you might kind of find that helpful if you just weigh it from a perspective of protecting the kids, and how is it going to sound to a judge and jury, unless you're going to get ready to write a big check to somebody, right? So.
Well, thank you, everybody. Again, we're here to be a resource for you. We've shared our contact information. So if you have additional questions, comments, resources, be sure to reach out to me and the team at ECAP or Ken and the folks at Church HR Network. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we wish you all the best in your ministry. All right, God bless.